o'clock. So Alan and Paul, please start recording. Paul, please press the go live button. And just Paul, signal to me when you've done that.
Everything is ready.
Okay, great. So hi everyone, and welcome to the to another one of the events organized by the International Manifesto Group. This one is co-organized by the important Hungarian left journal Ezmelet. So I will just say a couple of things, housekeeping details, and then hand over to the editor of Ezmelet, Attila Meleg, who will be moderating today's event. So the housekeeping details are, most importantly, please keep yourself muted if you are not speaking. So I see lots of people are here not yet muted, so please mute yourself. Or if you have forgotten, please don't mind if we mute you when you are not speaking. It just is better because that cuts out background noise and makes the recording better. Just so you know, we are also live on YouTube, and Paul will be sharing the YouTube link if you want to put it on your Facebook pages, etc. So without further ado, for now, I will simply hand over to Attila, who will get the proceedings going.
Okay. So welcome everybody. It's a great privilege to be among you. And I hope we are going to see a very lively discussion today, as it seems that history is telling us something that we need to reconsider certain processes right now. So the title of this event is Reconsidering the Collapse of Socialism in Eastern Europe. Our key motivation was to talk something about the root causes of the collapse of socialism in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. How can we understand this in the longer historical perspective? It's very important to stress here that the point is not a memory of the state socialism or socialism in Eastern Europe, but actually how it fits into the historical development and how we can see these developments from the current perspective. So we are going to talk about various economic dynamics, the problems of mixed economies, the role of the state, very importantly. We will use quite a number of theoreticians in this thinking, like Lukács and Mészáros, whose book Beyond Leviathan has just come out, at least the first volume of that. And then we will talk about, very importantly, work of self-government. It links to markets and planning in socialist countries. And very importantly, I will also give some concrete questions. But before that, let me introduce the speakers, whom are extremely distinguished persons in critical thinking. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Raquel Varela here, who is a labor historian and a researcher and professor with habilitation at Universidade Nova de Lisboa. She is honorary fellow at the IISH Amsterdam. In 2020, she was the first awarded of Simon Weil Grant in Munich, and she has been visiting as a senior researcher at the Europa Institute for European and Global Studies in Basel. She has published 34 books, among them, very importantly, the one many of us have read it carefully, The People's History of the Portuguese Revolution, and then the book, The People's History of Europe in the 20th Century, both coming out Pluto Press. So Raquel, it's a great pleasure to welcome you. It's also a privilege to welcome Rasko Mochny, who is a retired professor at University of Ljubljana. He is visiting professor at the Faculty of the Media and Communications, Belgrade, Doctor honoris causa at Plovdiv University, and I'm not going to read that. Exactly what point is that, the name of that? In the 1960s, he participated to the Yugoslav student movement, where he made a fame. In the 1970s and 80s, he was active in the alternative movement. In the 1990s, active in peace movement and keeping the ties among Yugoslav peoples. He translated and commented the works of Althusser, Barthes, Davidson, Durkheim, Lacan, Levi-Strauss, Marcel Mauss, and others. Now working on historical materials analysis of the restoration of capitalism in the Yugoslav region. author of several books on the theory of ideology and the epistemology of humanities, social sciences. The recent publications are worth mentioning: Writings on Contemporary Capitalism, this is in Croatian, Zagreb, and then the other one, Theory with Ideology, which is in the common language, Zajednički. Okay, this has come out in Belgrade. It's also a great honor to welcome Professor Tamás Kraus, who is an international renowned scholar of the Soviet and Russian history in the 20th century, with a special focus on left-wing intellectual history. His book entitled Reconstructing Lenin, the Intellectual Biography, was awarded the Deutscher Memorial Prize in 2015. He has acted as a founding member of the journal Eszmélet, which in English means consciousness, in 1989, which ever since has provided a unique forum in Hungary to discuss left-wing theoretical issues. He has accomplished an impressive theoretical organizational work to keep the left-wing thought alive in Eastern Europe and in Hungary. He is the editor of a wide range of books in Russian and in Hungarian, and he has published extensively on issues related to the theory of socialism in English, Russian, and Hungarian. He has acted as professor and head of the Department of Eastern European History at Eötvös Loránd University of Budapest until his retirement, when he earned the title Professor Emeritus. Currently, he is also the head of the doctoral program of the department, where he has established a strong school of doctoral students. And absolutely not least, Esther Barta is a guest today. She is an associate professor at the Department of Eastern and Central European and Russian History of Eötvös Loránd University of Budapest in Hungary. In the academic year 2018-19, she was a fellow at Rework in Berlin with the title Work and Human Life Cycle in Global History at Humboldt University, Berlin. In 2020-21, she has been affiliated with the Hannah Arendt Institute for Totalitarianism Studies at the Technical University of Dresden as a Marie Curie Research Fellow. Her main research field is the post-war social history of Eastern Europe, with an emphasis on labor and gender history. She has published extensively on the state socialist era and the working class, including her book, Alienating Labor, Workers on the Road from Socialism to Capitalism in Eastern Germany and Hungary, 2013, published by Bergen. Currently, she's engaged in a research which focuses on the newly formed industrial working class, right-wing populism in Eastern Europe and Hungary. From 2021, she is also an editor-in-chief of the Journal of Contemporary Central and Eastern Europe. My name is Attila Meleg, and I am a sociologist and an economist and a historian, and I have done quite a number of things, but the most important thing to mention here that I'm also an editor of Eszmélet Journal, and I have been working and thinking with many of you together up till now. And as a last point, before I give the floor to the speakers, for the sake of discussion, we collected some questions in order to stimulate the discussion. I read the questions now so that the speakers can develop their positions in, let's say, 8 or 10 minutes. And then I have basically 3 questions. The first question, looking back from the current era of a new cold, hot war of competing capitalist blocs, how do the speakers see the collapse of state socialism in Eastern Europe as a historical event and historical conjunctions from a complex historical point of view? The second question, concretely, what does the war in Ukraine show with regard to previous developments 30 years ago? Can we say something about statehood as a problem in the system, which we are taking from also from the last book of István Mészáros, that the state is extremely problematic in case we are not beyond capital. This book on Beyond Leviathan. And then very importantly, there is a comparative aspect concerning how we see the different trajectories of China, Cuba, Venezuela in comparison to East European trajectories, and then what we can learn out of that from the point of view of historical analysis. And then all this is done, of course, with some theoretical background and practical consequences, very importantly, because, of course, we are not just speaking about something in order to speak about it. So with this, I would like to leave the floor to the speakers. The speakers will speak, as I said, 8 to 10 minutes, and after that, everybody will have a chance to make comments, to put questions forward to the speakers or to each other. And then I suggest the following sequence. First, we start with Tamás Kraus. Then I would give the floor to Raquel Varela. Then Ratko Mochnik would come, and then Esther Barta is going to make her position. Now, with this, I think let's start the discussion. And with this, I give the floor to Tamás Kraus. Tamás, the floor is yours.
Dear friends, comrades, we here in Eastern Europe, the old generation suffers from the English language imperialism for a long time. So it means that my English is not too sophisticated, and if I need, Attila and Esther will help me, but I will read a short text in 10 minutes, very short text, about the main questions for the discussion. But if I understand the function of this conversation for this small conference, it is very practical aim, not scientific discussion in 10 minutes, of course. So we can speak about socialism as a practical challenge for the local and global left. And this is very important because the anti-capitalist left in Eastern Europe, where we lived in the old state socialist system, is very weak, including Russia. I don't know how, but in Western Europe or in the United States, many Marxist thinkers, but as a movement, socialism is, it seems to me, dead. As a movement, as a people's movement, workers' movement, are very weak. So it is important to restore the adequate, credible collective memory of state socialism for practical reasons. This is very important for practical reasons. In the light of its real history, we can see clearly that the past 30 years of neoliberal capitalism didn't bring a more human life for the low oppressed classes, but it rather triggered a cultural and social decline. This is very important because we have some theoreticians, anti-capitalist theoreticians they have a philosophy. We call this philosophy as philosophy of non-action, of nem cselekvés filozófiája. You could understand this, the philosophy of non-action?
Yes.
Very abstract philosophy and a total refusing of state socialist experience. But they do not have any practical concept what to do. And without history, we cannot make anything. If we don't understand the historical past, we cannot make anything in the future. This is a big historical experience from Marx, from Lenin, etc. This is the first problem. The present condition of the world and our region is the permanent structural crisis, from István Mészáros, structural crisis for which there is no capitalist solution. Any other alternative means renewed crisis, violence, war, famine, etc. As we lately see it on the example of Ukraine. The basis of any work, theoretically, politically, organizationally, and culturally, should be to render ourselves conscious and audience of this with the sole solution, the objective of replacing the present order with socialism. There is no other alternative to capitalism than socialism. Nothing else has been invented in human history. No any other alternative. That's why we have to put this project in the political or practical agenda of the global left, because any other kind of anti-capitalist left is dead everywhere. In Eastern Europe, 100% is kaput. NATO left, I call them, you see. The leftism, the NATO, for these leftist people here in Hungary. Very ridiculous. The third as a problem. Socialism cannot be invented. It is a living history, and the path towards socialism prepossesses the clear formulation of the objectives. In 1989, only few people understood this new self-governing socialism. Today, it has more followers. The Eastern European specificities, it means the final aim is socialism, socialist self-governance, because on the capitalist level, we cannot say anything. We cannot change anything. We cannot do anything. This self-government as a concept, however, this system cannot be introduced because we are speaking of a whole historical process, but we should see the objectives. The local national conditions determine how we can work for the same. In our region, it is impossible to form a mass movement without the strong and radical critique of the old state socialism. It is fundamental to stress the emancipatory features of the socialist project. This is most important practical task. The concrete aim, the most important aim, is the multi-sectoral mixed economy, self-management, self-organization, and its productive, economical, and political structure, the common state. How to make it? This is the theoretical and practical question which we inherited from Lenin and Lukács and István Mészáros. So we cannot return to state socialism because the requirements of the economic, productive, and cultural emancipation doesn't enable exceed this historical form. The population doesn't support the restoration of the old regime. We have to understand it. The multi-sectoral mixed economy consists of a market sector, a state sector, a common or cooperative communal sector. Namely, nationalization is not statization, the expansion of the state, but it means socialist property under the control of the elected bodies of communities. The followers of many writers consider themselves Marxists would mix and match state and social property together, arm in arm, with the neoliberals and neoconservatives, not to mention the false explanations that have come to the fore since the collapse of state socialism, the most typical and common of which is state socialism being called communism. the alternative. Okay. So the most important in Eastern Europe, 100%. The most important question, the question of the property. Why do not works defend? The followers of state socialism would ask, what will defend the workers from the capital and the state? In other words, why did not the workers defend the state socialism in 30 years ago? We had answer. We wrote about that 102 books and 1 million articles. This is a clear question, but we have to answer this question every time. The answer is the workers would themselves defend the communist state because they felt it to be theirs. The bureaucratic apparatuses, which are detached from society, stray from the path toward socialist self-governance, when their interests demand it, as we have seen in the history of our region. The socialist way of development is a possibility, a historical alternative, which alone is capable of liberating the world from the oppression of capital, but we can only do it with people who understand the lessons of the history of both capitalism and state socialism. Don't forget the main question. I repeat it. We have to split with the old heritage, which could not make difference between state and social ownership. This is the first and the last sentence. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Tamás. Thank you very much. Okay. And then very good points have already been made, but now I give the floor to Raquel Varela, and I'm sure that we are going to make some further very important statements. So Raquel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much to all, especially to the organizers, Radik and Alan and all the Manifesto group, and Diaz Melet, with whom I have a long contact and a long relation that allows me always to learn so much. I'm so grateful to join you in this discussion. So as I just have 10 minutes, I'm also go very, very directly to this, to the questions, which are an attentive to contribute to a discussion where I have a lot of doubts more than certainties. I think we have been, of course, debating and criticizing capitalism in the last decades, but I have the feeling, especially in the West, academia, intellectuals and Marxists, maybe it's a little bit better in the East, that we haven't done a deep discussion of what was the Soviet Union and what was the so-called socialism or real socialism. I don't think, first of all, that was socialism, so this is a discussion, but what I believe is that we should have much more discussion on this that we have. So my first remark will be something that I learned, in fact, in Budapest, which was not clear for me with the dialogues we have in more Western Marxism, let's say it like this. So the first remark is that when we speak on the collapse of the real existent socialism, we are speaking about different countries. So usually it's very easy to put all together, but we realize that these are not all the same. And so my remarks are going to be very general remarks, but I should make notice of this. What was happening in Poland, in Hungary, in Russia was not the same, and sometimes in Yugoslavia, this is a more, it's recognized by all that was different as well. So I think we should be, we should not move towards this very mechanic analysis of the Eastern countries, saying they were all the same. Making this as a note in the beginning, I think there is no doubt that we cannot understand the fall of the Soviet Union and the satellite countries without the role of the economic crisis of 1980-82. So we keep speaking on the long crisis from the 70s, and Mesaros has developed this, as you know, very well. I think for our discussion, we also should analyze what is the difference between a long crisis of capitalism since the 70s and permanent cyclical crisis. Because one thing is the crisis in the long term, and the other thing is the cyclical crisis. Capital was facing, in fact, a dramatic crisis in the 70s, and partially as answered with the open of the Chinese market, partially as answered with a huge competition among migrant workers, with informatic revolution, I don't like this, labor, productive restructuring, which is more accurate to speak about, a war economy. No doubt there is a war economy. Rosa Luxemburg was absolutely certain about this. 100 years ago, it's not just about Ukraine. There is a war economy in capitalism. But all these answers of capital made huge amount of profit. So capitalism, when we speak on a deep crisis of capitalism in the long term, we should not forget that capitalism was quite strong facing their crisis, even after the 70s. And I think one of the, let's say, the biggest answer of capital was being able to face the 80s crisis without avoiding political crisis. So we know that big crises usually come with revolutions. That was like this in 29 crisis and in the 30s. That was like that in the 70s. But the 80 crisis, we just saw revolutionary process late in Iran, late in Nicaragua, and in South Africa, a little bit in Brazil with the end of dictatorship. But we saw that capital was able to recover from the 82 crisis, which was a double dip crisis. So it was a very serious crisis. I believe that the crisis group, which the well-known Robert Kurz is the most prominent intellectual of this group, when he puts the tonic in the idea that the fall of the Soviet Union showed that the Soviet Union was deeply engaged in the world capitalist market, not in the same sense as the other countries, but the Soviet Union could not avoid the impact of a world capitalist crisis in 82, 84, showing that was much more involved in capitalism market, world market, than we could imagine before. So I think this idea of analyzing the impact of capitalism crisis in the long and short term is very important to understand what has happened in former Soviet Union countries. The second is the labor restructuring. The entering of the China in labor market at the beginning of the 90s meant the double of the workforce worldwide. This was the huge oxygen balloon to capitalism crisis, because at the same time brought millions of workers to capitalism, global market. And at the same time, this made a huge pressure over Western salaries in a double way. First, because of blackmailing Western unions, and they accepted the unions. I shall say something about this afterward. And secondly, because the cost of the reproduction of the labor force in Europe, US, became much cheaper. Why? Because the Western workers were being dressed by workers in China earning much less, as the same as all kind of products that are essential for the reproduction of the workforce. So I think this is one, this impact has to be in our analysis, which is the impact of labor restructuring. Also, of course, as we are seeing now, again, the opening of a labor market in Eastern European countries, of a labor market mainly to Germany, but not just to Germany. And this allowed a new international division of labor and increasing hugely the competition among workers, because it was not answered by an increased unionization or international solidarity among workers. So it increased dramatically the competition among laborers, as we saw after the 90s. And my other remark is about symbolic power in politics. I think that maybe the Western Marxism or the European US left or even Latin America was much attached, much more than they assume, to the idea that the Soviet Union existed to protect them, or the Soviet Union was a kind of, even with critics, the Soviet Union was part of a progressive process that could help the, that was a kind of a reason to debate socialism in the West. Soviet Union, China, and the other countries would be a reason to debate socialism in the West. And it was like, just to say it simple, when the Soviet Union fell down, it was the idea that the left considered what the neoliberals were saying: look, socialism has failed, you cannot defend socialism anymore. The left assumed this as part of their program, which was terrible symbolic. And I think the only way we can overcome this is by a dramatic critique to what has happened in Soviet Union. So we have to put again the idea of socialism on the table, and don't be afraid of what they tell us about what was socialism. We have to think about socialism as a program towards the future. One example I'm going to give. We speak on how this in so-called socialist countries, people have a better life through planned economy, education, health, and some basic needs that were assured. This is true because basic needs were assured in many countries. But basic needs are not socialism. I would like to underline this, calling Lukács to the table. Socialism is not about feeding people. Socialism is about the maximum development of humankind. And feeding people is just step number one, which is basic. But this is not socialism. Socialism is about developing the maximum freedom of people, the intellectual of people, the dreams of the people, the creativity of the people. So I think when we keep saying it, we were kind of, I believe the left in general was a kind of trapped in the idea that if you want socialism, you have to abdicate of freedom. Socialism is about giving basic things to the people. And when you give basic things to the people, you don't have freedom. And we should go out of this, going back to the main debates of the socialism in 19th century and the beginning of 20th century, saying, okay, this was a transitional process, for many reasons went wrong. Firstly, because of the defeat in revolutions in Western capitalist countries. But we want to develop, we want to put the program in socialism again. I'm just finishing saying this. Why people are going to defend a socialist program, which means, of course, let's face it real. Trotsky used to say this about revolutions and wars. The masses just go to revolutions and to wars when they don't have any other option. Any other option. Why? Because they know when they go to revolutions, they will face an armed bourgeoisie. They will face a civil war. This is a dead and life option. Revolution is not a romantic option. It is a romantic option for the people that know that there is no other option. But for the masses, it's a question of facing a threat to life. Why you are going to do this for house and bread? House and bread is very important. But if you look to the Spanish Civil War, if you look to the old revolutions in 20th century, people were fighting not just for bread and houses. They were fighting for theater. They were fighting for real democracy. They were fighting for freedom in the love relations. They were fighting for against alienation in the job place, not just for a salary, but for a job that has a meaning. So I think we should analyze the fall of so-called real socialism as a way to start start again a new socialist program. But how can we make a new socialist program if we have some nostalgia of the minimum, saying, okay, at least they had a minimum there. It's a debate I would like to have with you if you think it makes sense. For me, it makes a lot of sense when I read Lukács and Mészáros and all the question of fighting for socialism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raquel. Very, very important points. And thank you very much going into global history itself, which is very important, global social history itself. So let's continue the discussion. And I can see in the chat that the debate is heating up. So we are not going to be bored this afternoon, that's for sure. So the next speaker is Rosca Mochnik. So the floor, Rasko, is yours, right? And we are eager to listen to you on the experiences you have, right?
Thank you, Attila. Hello, dear colleagues. I'll go very schematically and we'll try to present the thesis that there exists continuity in the class dynamics between the destruction of historical socialisms and what is going on right now, including the war in Ukraine. My experience is mostly Yugoslav, and that's where I also work, trying to produce some analysis. Now, the starting point is that historical socialisms were contradictory social formations, where contradictory processes were going on. On one side, socialist processes, on the other side, capitalist processes. And there was a third kind of processes that were anti-socialist, but nevertheless peculiar, specific to the socialist formations, namely formation and reproduction of various bureaucracies. The overall cohesion of this contradictory social formation was assured by the dominating groups. So we here have a paradox that lasted that lasted since Stalinist fractions came into power in the Soviet Union. That there are different anti-socialist bureaucratic fractions that assure the reproduction of a society where socialist processes are still dominating to a certain extent. And I will go now to the Yugoslav case because it shows very nicely the interlinking of politics and economy and internal economy and world system processes. So in Yugoslavia, there was an antagonistic contradiction between working people and the ruling bureaucracies. The ruling bureaucracies were divided basically into two fractions. One that was political bureaucracy, which was anti-socialist, but specific to socialist formations. The other was high management, which could be also called economic bureaucracy. And that fraction inclined towards capital, supported actually capitalist process. So what developed with time was contradiction between working people and the managerial fraction of bureaucracy, which was taking increasingly capitalist form. But in Yugoslavia, it was held on the level of a particular productive unit of production. Why? Because of the workers' self-management. So you have an incredibly interesting paradox that the workers' self-management, which was definitely a socialist form of managing the units of production, was the reason why the conflict, the capitalist conflict between the management and the workers remained closed within the productive unit, within the workers' collectives. And additionally, market socialism helped it because workers' collectives started to behave on the basis of profit motivation. So there was one complex of contradiction. The other complex of contradiction was the federal nature of Yugoslavia. Yugoslav League of Communists was organized as an association of League of Communists of particular republics. So there was a potentially nationalist element worked into the organizational structure of the League of Communists of the Communist Party of Yugoslavia. Secondly, and more importantly, the sectorial divergences, basically in economy, basically divergences between technologically developed, export-oriented economy of Slovenia, say, and Croatia to a certain extent, and extractivist economy of, let's say, Bosnia and Herzegovina. The sectorial discrepancies coincided with the partitioning of Yugoslavia into federal republics. So you have another germ of conflict, which was not necessarily a national conflict, a nationalist conflict, if you had an organization with a communist orientation, which would control these discrepancies and lessen them with a planned economy. But planned economy in Yugoslavia was abandoned in 1963, even before the market reforms in 1965. So what happened was that at the end of the 70s, at the beginning of the 80s, Yugoslavia was caught in the debt trap about which Raquel was speaking. And this debt trap has a particular effect in Yugoslavia because it differently affected the export-oriented republics and the extractivist republics. At the beginning of the 80s, all the bureaucracies were already ideologically liberal, which meant that political bureaucracy and economic bureaucracy struck an alliance on the liberal platform. and this necessarily led towards nationalist conflict among federal republics. So I leave the actualistic part to the discussion, but I will give you the premise of it. The premise is that as soon as the political dynamics was taken over by the fraction conflicts within bureaucracies, and as soon as bureaucracies consolidated on the liberal platform, the workers, the people's movements, which did exist, there was a striking movement in Yugoslavia. There were several waves of it. There was a massive anti-bureaucratic movement in different parts of Yugoslavia on different platforms. Some quite Stalinistic, the others rather left liberal. But nevertheless, when you don't have an organizing force of those movements, then the bureaucracy will take over and organize them. And what happened? What happened in Yugoslavia, from my understanding, is what Gramsci called Piedmontese function of the state. There was no bureaucracy, no bourgeoisie, no local bourgeoisie in post-socialist countries to perform the counter-revolution. But there was the state controlled by the bureaucracies. So they used this mechanism to make a coup from above downwards to restore capitalism. So I think it was a clear counter-revolution from above, using Piedmontese function of what was at that moment already bourgeois nation states. And those bourgeois nation states exist today. They manage a dependent capitalism with comprador bureaucracies and with weak local bourgeoisies, which are partly state bourgeoisies, that means officials, military, parasitic groups, and partially local capital, which is weak capital of the type of Juan Inigo Carrera, Argentinian economist, was investigating it. It's a local capital, a weak capital that does not participate in the formation of the average rate of profit. So their profit rate is underneath of the average rate of profit. So they hardly survive, and they need a state support, which is usually called corruption, but which it's a systemic feature. It's not an excess. So I will stop here, but let me repeat, the situation now is dependent capitalism in bourgeois nation states with comprador bureaucracy on power, and with a weak with a weak local capital in the Balkans, a stronger capital in Hungary, of course, because it enjoys state support, and with oligarchic type of capital both in Russia and Ukraine. Let me stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rasko. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Very interesting, and thanks a lot for showing that how it was not beyond capital, as Saroj put it, right? So the whole system was not beyond capital. But I think it's a very important point, and very important practical points actually made in the analysis, to which we have to come back both politically and economically as well. But let me give the floor to our speaker, Esther Barta, who has worked quite a lot on workers' sociology as well. And then the most I learned from the 1980s, how workers could see socialism, I learned it from her. So now let's listen to her, that she can make her points.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Attila is okay? Okay, thank you very much.
Brilliant.
So far. So I really wanted to bring in this dimension of labor, which actually Rakel already discussed a bit or raised a bit. And there was one question at the beginning, that why the workers did not defend the worker state. That's a very long, that goes back to a very long history. which we can actually consider now from 30 years perspective. In my own research, I compared the Hungarian and the East German case, but I would assume that the Czechoslovakia certainly belongs here. And the basic findings of an in-depth archival research was that the Stalinist variant of state socialism, characterized by collectivization, super-industrialization, and the planned economies, basically, and coercion, certainly, were exhausted a bit. This was indicated in the German case. We had a workers' revolt on the 17th of June, 1953. In the Hungarian case, 56. And the lesson that the party learned was that the workers' at least economic demands needs to be considered. So I make 2 points here, and one is that I don't want to say it was a worker state because it was not. The working class did not rule, as Rostya argued. It was basically the state bureaucracy which was the privileged class, but the state had to take into consideration the working class demands much more powerfully, or to much greater extent than certainly under neoliberal capitalism. Precisely because of the demands of legitimacy, basic legitimacy. So on the one hand, it was not worker state. On the other hand, the labor policy had to be, in one way or another, had to consider real working class interests concerning working class education, culture, the theaters, the cheap books, other means of high culture, and working class wages, working class housing, and so on and so on. Then comes the question as why the workers did not defend the state. I would say that in the 70s they might have done it actually, because even according to dissident Hungarian sociologists, in the mid-70s, the Hungarian party secretary Kádár was so popular that he could have been actually even a democratic re-election, because that was the peak of this welfare policy, which was targeted at the working class. Urban, I would make distinctions, urban, large industrial, and mostly men working class, or male working workers. And why then in 1990 they did not defend the state? Because these worker state, or ex-worker state, or worker state in brackets, promised ever-increasing standard of livings, and consumption levels which are comparable to the capitalist countries. But that comes a trick. Under capitalist countries, the workers in the region all meant the West German or the Austrian or the American standard of living. So basically, the West was identified with the advanced capitalist region, and not with the less developed, with the peripheral capitalism. So I would say that was a trick that in 1989 most workers expected a kind of capitalism which they saw in West Germany, this sort Wirtschaftsdemokratie, or how it was called, that there is no high unemployment and there are relatively abundant consumer goods available to workers, such as Mercedes and washing machines, and so on and so on, which the planned economies could not produce. So this would be my contribution, perhaps, to the question why it was the illusion of stability. So everybody expected that the workers, or not everybody, but most Westerners expected that either there would be a continuation of the state socialist past, or there would be a third way. Under that meaning, what Professor Klaus Kraus explained, third way, meaning that not state socialism, not capitalism, but workers, but a society based on socialist self-management, workers' self-governance, and so on and so on. And this did not happen because of the because of the different expectations of workers. I think I have, Attila, 2 more minutes or 1 more minute. Do I have 1 more minute?
Oh, four.
Okay, then so post-state socialist era. Then again, I studied mainly Hungary and Germany, but Poland, I'm sure, belongs here, and also other Western countries, even France, that it has been observed already at the beginning of the 2000s that the right-wing parties attract more and more working class districts or working class voters, and even in the West, but certainly in the East. In my explanation, I would attribute the triumph of Kaczynski and Fidesz to these working class voters who were lost for the left-wing political parties, mainly because the workers no longer identified with the left, the political left, but they came to believe that these right-wing populist parties listened to their voice or and amplified their voice more effectively than the socialist parties, which is a big problem and also failure of the left in the region, I would say. And again, there are many possible explanations why the workers switched from the right to the left, from the left to the right. And I would outline, single out here some reasons. The multinational company culture strengthens individualization, awards or remunerates individual efforts, individual success, and basically they are quite strongly against the trade unions and any collective efforts or really collective action. So the workers lost the faith in the collective action, and they are to this idea of self-made man. So you have to make yourself, blah 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 blah. So this individualist company culture largely shapes identities, working class identities, which then tend to be less sympathetic to the left-wing ideas of communities, common societies, and so common action. And I think even more importantly, with the weakening of class identities, ethnic, nationalistic, religious, and other identities come to the floor, and also the gender issue can be excited here, but it's a longer question why masculine identities are more pronounced at the shop floor than emancipated identities. And since the radical right-wing parties promote strongly masculine identities, that also supports their appeal to the workers. And while in the very last sentence, the political left or the left, what we can associate with left, also got lost in these identity politics, like that they are with the problems of, I don't want to say that how many genders is not important, it's very important, but for the workers, it's much more important whether the factory is going to move to the east or not, rather than questions of really very fragmentized identities. So once the class politics is exchanged by is replaced by identity politics, I think the left finds itself in a really serious faces really serious challenges and troubles. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Esther, and thank you very much for bringing up the problem of nationalism in the region and coming out from also spread around the workers. It's a very important point, which is also, so we have, I think, both the working class, the state, the idea of socialism, and how to put that into global history. This was the aim. And with this, I would like to leave the floor for discussion. Those people who have started a long debate in the chat, I would like to ask them, in case, because these chats are also very important, but I would like to ask them to come forward and then put forward questions to the speakers now, because of course, speakers could not follow it and people could not follow it thoroughly. And then I can see that the first hand is already raised. So with this, I give the floor to Brian Green. The floor is yours, and after that, John Riddle comes. Right, Brian,
right.
The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for taking me first, because I want to try and shift the debate a bit to talk about planning. Look, as far as I'm concerned, the 2020s is the decade when capitalism finally hits obstacles it can't surmount. I mean, we're looking at the following. We're looking at its failure of reproduction. We're looking at the march of the robots, the fact that 40% of white-collar workers will lose their jobs to machine learning. We're looking at the escalating hegemonic war between China and the United States. And of course, we're looking at global warming. Now, these all compound. So I would say living existing capitalism is going to find a challenge it hasn't found before. So that makes the key ideological debate centers on planning and what went wrong in the Soviet Union around the question of planning. So that's what I'd like us, and I won't take up more time, but that's what I'd like us to try and discuss in slightly more detail. It's something I have tackled on my website. There are a number of articles. There's the pamphlet, there's the program, there's a number of other articles to show why profit couldn't work when Kosygin introduced it. Many other aspects of why planning had to fail. Now listen, planning had to fail in the Soviet Union. It wasn't a question of whether or not it was going to fail. It had to fail because that kind of planning, which isn't based on labor time, is completely unviable. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you very much. John, your question is not related, because then I would give the chance the speakers to answer. So you are not related to this problem of structural crisis of capitalism and planning. That's not, it's something different, right? I assume. Yes, okay. So then very quickly, so here is a question comment coming from Brian. So I give the floor to the speakers to reply immediately to this question. Who would like to start? Tomasz, the floor is yours. Tomasz, you are the microphone, Tomasz.
Yes, very strange. Yeah, I understand it. Brian, I have a question to you. What kind of plan do you think about? Because in the history, we had different kind of plans. State plan, common plan, I don't know, plan of cooperatives. What kind of plan you mean?
Okay.
May I answer?
Mm-hmm.
Cross, I've called it consumer-led planning because planning can only be done on the consumption side. So with consumer planning, workers who know what their labor time contribution is and who know what things cost in terms of labor time in real time can instruct the planning bodies. You see, the roles are reversed. In the Soviet Union, the planners were active and consumers were passive. In a real communist society, the consumers are active and the planners are passive. They are only an administration body. What they do is they collect the instructions from workers via the internet. And incidentally, if capitalism hadn't invented the internet, communist society would have out of necessity.
I understand.
And the other thing is, on the other side, is that the planners don't tell the producers how and how quickly to produce it, because that only leads to guerrilla warfare between the production units and the planners. So the planners don't decide what is going to be produced, and they don't decide how quickly it's going to be produced, because those were the two contradictions which in the end helped collapse the Soviet Union. Does that clarify the situation? And it's discussed in much greater detail on my website.
Okay, thank you very much. Thomas, would you like to make a further comment or not? Or
only one sentence of what was a failure in the history of the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe. The bureaucratic center plans is bad alone. You see, the critic of the bureaucratic state planning, we cannot go anywhere.
okay.
You see,
Right.
in Russian, underline that without planning, no socialist transition, but the planning is not a bureaucratic state planning. How to control the planning? This is the main question to me.
Okay.
And another moment, how to make it. First, now a little bit joking. First step, general strike. Second, occupying of the worker places, etc. Third, the organization of the councils, etc., by the workers. The fourth, first privatization, new constitution, etc., etc. And the fifth or sixth, the new constitution has to underline that the socialism is some kind of planning economy. Plan economy. It's true. This is my how to say it, my meggyőződésem.
Conviction.
Yeah.
Yes, conviction. Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else would like to comment this quickly? Rasko, Esther, anybody? Raquel,
Sorry,
please
can I
unmute
say
yourself.
something?
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, something very quickly. I'm going to say this, which I think, I know it's a little bit heretic, but first of all, I do not think that the biggest problem of humanity is global warming or climate change.
Of course.
I think the biggest problem of humanity is labor and social relations. And I think it was developed, this idea, by the bourgeoisie in the last 10 to 15 years that we are in the merge of a collapse and the world will finish. It's a new millenarism idea. Secondly, we do have ecological problems, but these ecological problems cannot be solved in capitalism, just with another approach between cities and villages. And my third approach is that what the bourgeoisie has proposed to go out of the crisis was the so-called Green Deal, labor restructuring. And this is impossible to do because in Germany, for example, would mean to destroy the welfare state and put this money in subsidize to so-called green companies to being restructured. And I think this is a huge fake program because the real program of the bourgeoisie is not the green program, it's the militarization. That's what we saw in Ukraine, is that the Greens came to power and said, we are going to make militarized Germany. And that's the economy of war. So
green war, the new word, green war. They say
green war, yeah, green war or whatever.
Okay.
So I think that the question of plan economy is really important if we speak on democratic plan economy, of course. But I don't think that there will be a plan economy for a green ecological change in capitalism, what the world bourgeoisie is saying to us. And now it's absolutely clear in the last months is that there is no solution for capitalist crisis except destruction, immobilization of capital, and that's militarization. So there was never really a green plan. In fact, the green plan means that a nuclear I don't know
power generation.
Nuclear power generation is green, which is very interesting from the point of view of ecological standards. So,
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much. In case you would like to ask questions, or even those among the speakers, please use, as Radhika says, the hand function. So the raise the hand function, because I can see. So the next it's going to be John Riddle, and after him Susan Weiss is going to speak, and after that Michael Mahadev. Right. So this is the way how we proceed. And in case the questions are related, let's collect them, right? Not just stop one by one, but let's see whether they are related. So John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I can be heard. You hear me?
Very well. We can hear you very well. Yes.
Thank you very much. I would like to direct attention to the beginning of the process of what we're calling state socialism that we're discussing today. And that is go back to the 1950s. And when there were uprisings in Hungary and East Germany and Poland in that period, what I found out in asking about this with supporters of the process was that this was the result of a sort of fascist resurgence. Now, that did not seem too credible to me at the time, particularly after I visited the region. But later on, I got involved in a project that required doing biographies of the leaders of the communist movement in the 1930s and the 1940s and subsequently. And it was striking that a very high proportion of them had fallen victim to not to attacks by fascism, but to what was generated within their own movement, to the purges of the 1930s and after, and that had continued. And that seemed to me to place a question mark in terms of the relationship of this movement that had such a questionable starting point, its relationship with its own working people. And so I'm wondering if it's possible that the initial phase and the constitution of the state socialism in Eastern Europe, in this sense, had an impact on its later fate. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's a very important question on the dynamics, on the historical dynamics of socialism. Is your question related to this, Susanna? No. Okay.
Thank you. This has been a very interesting discussion. I think we need much more. I especially liked the term that Klaus Tamas used, and that is state socialism. I also liked the remarks of Raquel Valera, especially when she said that it's not just the basic needs of the workers, but also the voice of the workers, the participation of the workers in building the society. And I just like to say that I went to Poland in 1982 at the height of the Solidarność struggle. And that's what I learned, that from the struggle, I had interviews with different people, including Lech Walesa and also Anna Valentinovich. And Anna Valentinovich told me that she explained the MKZ. or MKZ, as they say in Canada. The Workers' Inter-Factory Committee, where they posted 21 demands, of which the first was the right to create an independent national trade union, free from governmental control. And they also called for government to respect constitutional rights and freedoms, dismantle the privileges of the government-run Polish United Workers' Party, and take actions to improve economic conditions of the Polish people. She said there were various wings to the MKZ, and Lech Walesa represented, she said, the wing that supported or was friendly to the United States. The thing that was surprising to me is when I discussed the issue of socialism, which way the workers were going to go, towards socialism or which way they were going to go. And most of the conversations I had described that they wanted a democratic socialism. They never heard of the Cuban Revolution and its example, but they wanted a Swedish type of capitalism. And that's what they were working for. Lech Walesa led the workers' movement with the support of the US imperialist government towards capitalism.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's a related question because it's also concerning what was the real historical outcome of that. We have lost much. Andras, your question is related or it's a different type? We don't hear you because your microphone is muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, so the question is whether your question is related because
totally.
Then,
yes, totally, absolutely.
Totally.
And
then please put it forward, and then we answer these three questions in one round. Thank you, Andras. Okay. The floor is yours. Yes.
10 seconds just to say that I'm delighted to be part of this discussion. Very pleased to listen to some incredibly interesting points, and I just wanted to react to Tamás Kraus, to Esther, and the whole question of the only alternative to capitalism is socialism, according to Tamás. And the real question is, what on earth is socialism today, after its devaluation by the practitioners of socialism in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, which were recognized by István Mészáros, who called that practice a fraud, basically, an affinity fraud, its entire length from the beginning to the end in 1990. Number one. Number two, why did the workers didn't defend socialism in 1990? The answer is simple, because it wasn't their socialism. It wasn't their state. It wasn't a worker state that ended in 1990, but the bureaucrats' state, which was established by Stalin in 1928 and has run its course by 1990. Thirdly, Brian Greene's point about planned economies and how we should focus on that. The Eastern European and Soviet, and to a very large extent, the Chinese experiment has nothing to do with economic planning. And I'm surprised that we are still saying this kind of nonsense. These were command economies where political leaders had their preferences. Lenin had electrification, Stalin had heavy industry, and so on and so forth. And then the Politburo gang of men and they were men always, and to this day, told their flunky bureaucrats to break their preferences down to the shop floor and put the noses of the workers to the grindstone to produce the idiocy that has resulted in fraudulent socialism in Eastern Europe. So let's focus on this real challenge to the crisis that capitalism has produced, and we are unable to confront it because we're using outmoded thoughts. And especially today, and I'm going to end it with this last sentence, we are now in the digital phase of capitalism, which poses entirely different challenges than the industrial capitalism that we faced in the 19th and early 20th century. And we should focus our attention to the kind of capitalism we have today, which is specialized, lays its emphasis on destroying the vision of working men and women, destroying their capacity to recognize or distinguish illusion from reality. I'm talking about the cyber language of digital capitalism. That's what we should be focusing on. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I give the floor to the speakers to react to these three questions. The first one was about that whether the initial start of socialism had an impact later. Then we had a comment question concerning the workers' movement and what interest they were following actually doing this. And what András is referring to is fraudulent socialism and how we should understand that, whether it was a common economy or not, and then how it actually could evolve. These questions are related to each other, so I give the floor to speakers. I don't know, Rako, would you like to say something on Rasko or Esther? And then Tamás was personally asked also, but let's start with the others. Just a second, Tamás. Others would like to start. Rasko, would you like to make comments concerning these questions? Yes, go ahead then.
Now, just a historical footnote. The most successful period of Yugoslav socialism was between late 50s and beginning of the 60s, when there was a combination of plan and the market. And the problem is how you distribute the two mechanisms. Now, of course, the Yugoslav reconstruction after the World War II was a development of Department One, according to Marx, that means the producer goods, and the market was left to the consumer goods, basically. Now we have another example of successful combination of market and planning, even though I guess not everybody will agree with that example. And then the case of socialism with Chinese characteristics, as its promoters call it. So you have privatization and market mechanisms in certain sectors of economy, but not in the strategic ones. And the strategic sectors that are left in the state property, state ownership, are not functioning according to the profit motive. And I think that this, the historical experience of socialism shows that this is the question for really existing socialism. And we could bring into the debate the failure of the developmentalist state in Latin America, where this mixture never really worked because of the opposition of reactionary classes at home, local classes. So I would introduce a kind of class approach combined with this problem of pragmatic mixture of plan and market in history. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, in case Esther and Raka doesn't want to say something, then I give the floor to Tamás because he was, and allow me to step out for a moment because I also would like to give one more comment concerning the questions, but Tamás, the floor is yours.
only in some words. We had a question about the dynamic of the
Yes, exactly.
Of the system. First, workers' councils, then the state. After that, state and market, and at the end, the market. This is the trend. But Rasko said in the beginning very well that these regimes are very contradictory regime. In one sentence, I can show this contradictory character. I grew up in a system where from the childhood, every day you could read one sentence of the Constitution. All the productive forces, the land, the fabric, etc., belong to the working people. That was the main sentence. You see, I remember 60 years ago. But in reality, instead of that, state bureaucratic ownership. But we saw that the state bureaucratic ownership belonged to the people. And after 68, we understood that that was happened something else. But this is very important. Everybody can read the Communist Party program in the Soviet Union 1961 about the communism. Exact. From Marx would say that very good. You know, ideologically, this system got his legitimacy from the revolution. After that, they changed character, they went to the capitalism. And we became capitalism because the communist leadership all the time reformed the regime in the market. And if you reform the regime all the time into capitalist market, you will get a capitalist regime. That's why we have to understand that all the critics of state socialism, which wants to throw out everything, is bad. Very bad, because the state socialism regime could make a hole on the wall of capitalism. And now no hole. Nowadays, you see, no hole. We have to think about that.
Yes, Radhika, I see that you have a question. Immediately I give you the floor, but I wanted to add to the discussion. And then it's a follow-up to Rasko, a very important point he made. With one slight change. So within socialism, market was market, but it was not real market in the sense how the capitalist market is understood. And very importantly, this led to, and this is my reaction to András as well, it was not a common economy. What we learned in economic sociology was that it was a bargaining economy. So there were socialist companies which could not be sold in the market. They were producing for the market, and they were negotiating and bargaining with central authorities concerning price, wage, and very important regulations. And this is something very important because this is not a common economy in its true sense of the word, because it's bargaining. And actually, from a social point of view, we have to think about these things, because that's very important. In the end, of course, we know that this collapsed and workers did not defend it. Very importantly, was probably because the point of Raquel can be reversed in some way. A minimalist production of welfare. Workers can think that it can work outside socialism as well, because the key things about socialism, and this is when we come back to István Mészáros, is actually that the state is swallowed by the society. And the state was not swallowed by the society, which meant that there was no specificity in this satisfaction of needs. And I think that's a very important point. And this is what I think what we should go around again and again, because I think then we are ahead in the 21st century as well in setting the goals and understanding comparative things. But sorry for stepping out of my position as a moderator, so I move back to the moderator and I give the floor to Radhika, right? The floor is yours.
Thanks, Attila. I know that was absolutely part of your moderator's prerogative to direct the discussion in a proper fashion. I really appreciate all of the contributions from the floor as well as from the speakers. And I just want to say, well, the main question in my mind is the following. I guess it's a two-part question. Would the speakers please reflect, and Attila as well, if you want, would the speakers and Chair please reflect on the fact, on the type of economy that East European countries got after the collapse of communism, and what does that make you feel about what was valuable about communism and not? That's the first thing. And secondly, in the context of the current war over Ukraine, which is really, to my mind, a war the United States is waging against Russia over Ukraine, in this context, and particularly understanding that, of course, Eastern European communism was very much a result of the fact that essentially these were the lands that the Red Army liberated in the Second World War. And so given those sort of geopolitical aspects of the question, how do you relate the present crisis to the communist era and the post-communist era, broadly speaking? So I know these are really big questions, but I think these are obviously very important from today's point of view. So, to repeat, the economic situation in Eastern Europe today, and then the overall geopolitical economy of the situation in Eastern Europe today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Radhika. Let us, Andras, is it okay that we give the floor to answer these questions first and then you come, right? Is it okay? Cool. So then I give the floor again to the speakers. Maybe Esther, you would like to say something, Rakua, you would say, and so on. So let's give answers to these very broad and very important questions. Yes, Esther, the floor is yours.
I think I have touched a bit on the issue of disappointment, which I think is very important to understand the post 1989 era in Eastern Europe. And the further east you go, the higher the so-called human costs, social costs, human costs that the average laborers had to pay for the changes of regimes. I can only cite one number from Ukraine, that in the 90s, the Ukrainian male life expectancy decreased by 10 years. So I think that that the population had to pay the costs unprecedented in peacetime for 1989, and this disappointment was exploited by the right-wing populist forces, in many cases even far right-wing forces, to channel the working class discontent, which arose from the contradictions of capitalism into a much simpler framework, which blamed the multinational companies, global capital, Jewish capital, and so on and so on, and even developed conspiracy theories. In the case of Ukraine, I know very little research, but I think it would be very important to really investigate it from the war, from the perspective of labor history, because Ukraine used to be the most successful Soviet republic. And especially in the eastern part, the heavy industry mining was very important. And once these industries were deindustrialized, obviously it left many people without jobs. And I mean, I have to give the word then to Tomasz because he's an expert on the Ukraine. But my feeling is that this poverty could be then very easily exploited by the Western capital and also by the oligarchs to to create the illusion in the people that it is possible to catch up with the advanced Western countries. It is possible to live to afford or to increase the standard of living at least to the level of Austria or Germany, if they separate from if they get out of the Russian sphere of influence. And here so I believe that this labor discontent and despair and poverty and all that could be very easily exploited by Western powers against Russia.
Okay, thank you very much. Raquel, would you like to make a comment?
Just a very short one. I think the debate on the role of the state is very important. So, for example, on the study I've made on the Portuguese Revolution, all the debate here was about how many, so there is a kind of I would call it a social democratic approach, which is led by sociologist Boaventura Sousa Santos, that underlines that the Portuguese Revolution proves that when workers struggle, they can oblige socialist measures to capitalist states. And I have done all my research saying that it was not about obliging the state to have socialist measures, but fighting against the state through workers' organizations. So the question is not just about the results, it's about who and in what process are the results achieved. Because you can have a wage increase in a capitalist society, but if you have a wage increase conquered by workers' rank and file self-organization, you have a development of workers' conscience and a development of workers' power. So, for example, this is very clear on the question of nationalizations. Nationalizations are not a socialist measure. Capitalists do it every time when they need it. Even the planned economy, I must say, because, I mean, Nazism was a really high planned economy and it was capitalist. Military, usually military, if you look to the military expenses in US now, they are private companies, but they are organized by the Ministry of Defense and by public budget in probably one of the most planned or unique planned sectors in United States, which is war economy. So I think the question of nationalization, for example, when we look back to what happened in Soviet Union or in Eastern countries, the property was state property, but was it workers' property? Shouldn't we make this question? There is this, Lenin itself had this debate when he was seeing the state getting strong at the beginning of the revolution. If a state is getting strong, socialism is not getting stronger. There is an opposition here between workers' development and state development. And I think one of the problems of the so-called real socialism was that state was coming in some ways bigger and bigger and bigger, stronger and stronger, and workers were outside of any decisions or involved in any economic demands, results, decisions, etc., etc. So I think we shall not make a confusion between what is public, collective, and state. These are three different concepts. Sometimes we mixture them, I think.
Thank you very much. Anybody would like to make a comment? By the way, we are going to organize a huge conference on these issues in September, which is going to be the next conference on the mixed economy. But anyway, other comments? Yes, Rasko, then you, and then I give the floor to András. to put his
yeah,
question,
I
and
would-
Ellen would like to ask,
Mohammed.
and Brian has a question as well. And we have to plan it because we have 20 minutes left, right? We have to be careful about time. So Rasko, the floor is yours.
So quick answers to the questions put by Radika. What is worth re-examining and keeping in heritage from socialism? Social property as opposed to state property. There was a serious attempt in this direction in Yugoslavia. Secondly, worker self-management, but not limited to the units of production. It should go beyond, and it never did. Then non-profit motivation of production. There were attempts in Yugoslavia with so-called income motivation, and income is individual, collective, and common. So that's something to be retained and examined. Fourth, social management in public services, which comes close to what Brian Green was talking about. Social management was negotiating between consumers and producers of education, health, pension system. So in public services, and of course non-alignment. Samir Amin called it the bourgeois type of anti-imperialism. But it was a realistic attempt, and it did bring results. When you had a non-aligned bloc within the United Nations functioned differently. So that's regarding socialism. Regarding the state, my hypothesis is that the origin of the present authoritarianism in post-socialist Europe is that capitalism was restored by state constraint from above. And now let's look back. The concept of étatisme autoritaire, authoritarian statism, was proposed by Nikos Poulantzas in 1978 for metropolitan states, for metropolitan countries. So there was this trend of the state getting more and more distant from the population, from the citizenry in liberal terms, already after 68. 68 is a break. 68 is the year of the greatest general strike in France and of the treason of communist parties in the West, of the French Communist Party, and then came Eurocommunism, a revisionist variant promoted by the Italian, French, and Spanish parties. So that's my answer, that authoritarian state is nothing specific to post-communism. Only in post-communism, the imperialist powers can blackmail ruling bureaucracies by saying you are authoritarian, you are not democratic. But what is bourgeois democracy? Is it a democracy? So I leave it at that. And finally, Ukraine. Just my position is this. United States are waging a proxy imperialist war in Ukraine. Secondly, in Ukraine, the local capitalist class dominates over political bureaucracy. Political bureaucracy is comprador bureaucracy, totally dependent upon the Euro-Atlantic imperialism. The interesting processes are going on in European Union. European Union shifted into Euro-Atlantic Pact. Now the whole Western Europe is a comprador vilayet of the United States. It's incredible how fast it happened.
Suicided.
Sacrificing the fractions of its local capital. So the new comprador European bureaucracy is taking over the local capital, which I guess is also a process in Russia. In Russia, local bureaucracy, which is not comprador, which is state bureaucracy, is now controlling the oligarchs. And maybe now, of course, what's will happen, we don't know. But it's sacrificing the oligarchs in this conflict. So, so that's my, let's say, schematic position. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now I give the floor to András, and then Ellen comes, and then Ryan, and then I think we have to close because we have 15 minutes left, and this is online conversation. This is tiresome for people, so we have to pay attention to that. So András, the floor is yours.
Okay, I will only respond in 1 minute, and please cut me off if I go up beyond that. The essence of capitalism is that it puts the interest of capital before the interest of the workers, okay? Number one. Number two, the systems that we had in Eastern Europe in the Soviet Union are systems that put the interests of state capital ahead of the interests of the workers in that part of the world. The system that existed in that part of the world until 1990 were command economies, not bargaining economies. There was bargaining within the command economic system, Attila, but it was bargaining between capitalists, state capitalists. It was bargaining between the heads of the factories, state-owned factories, the managerial class appointed by the state, and the so-called planners who were flunkies for the Politburo.
Yeah.
To call Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union a state socialist system is a misnomer, and no one but István Mészáros pointed that out to us throughout his bloody life. And for us to sit around here applauding István Mészáros at the same time as we applaud the International Manifesto Group's attempt to resurrect the legacy of the Soviet Union, in my view, is a lunacy and a disservice to the workers of the world. Thank you.
Okay, and then the Thomas, you would like to react? Yeah, Thomas, the floor is yours, and then I give the floor to Ellen.
András,
Yes.
you can you hear me?
Of course I can. Lovely
Please
to see you.
Read the text of Ling Zhang to everyone. Please. The system is contradictory. In your position, this contradiction this is a state socialist regime, is a state capitalism. You know, István Mészáros was a very good friend of me. We visited each other. We had many discussions, conversations about. He never used state capitalism. Never used it. And he told me that you are right, state socialism has a term better than state capitalism. Ling Zhang, read this text. I don't know where is Ling Zhang, but this text is good. This is the contradiction character of the system. You see, not so simple. I am a big critic of state socialism, but this is not a capitalist regime. This is not capitalism. You have to understand it. If you don't understand, this is a very big discussion, you know, very big discussion. Very big discussion.
Yes.
You support as a liberal to the capitalist regime. You don't want to understand the deprivatization of our state ownership, you see, into private ownership in 1989. They stole everything. In US, in Germany, etc. This is very important. Without that, nothing.
Okay, before I give the floor to Ellen, just one more sentence to you, András. The managers of the socialist companies were the cooperatives, and they were representing local interests as well within the system. We know it from sociology crystal clearly that it was not just a command economy as such. That was all. I just wanted to give a sociological background for the whole thing, and that does not question the analysis of Rasko. because Rasko was correct that in the end, this managerial bureaucracy could be persuaded to go toward capitalism. That's, the two things cannot be mixed, but still socialism existed. They had a different functioning. That was the only thing I was saying, but that's, I think, a long debate which we will continue a long time. So I just wanted to point this contradictory nature into a sociological perspective. But the floor is for Alan, because he has been waving his hand for quite a long time already. So Alan, the floor is yours, right?
Not waving, but drowning. I had the reaction hand up, that's all. You cannot deduce from that how patient I am. I think that I really welcomed Andras's comments, and I want to explain why. It's because despite his denunciation of me and Radika and the positions, we have come to be participants in the discussion. That's what we want. There are two things the left must learn to do. The first is it must learn to disagree. And the second is it must learn to communicate that it has to be a worldwide process, the reconstitution. And you have to start from somewhere. The manifesto exists as a basis for discussion. So I'm pleased that he takes part. Now, my main point is about planning. I want to direct your attention to the centrality of the issue of planning in the current Russian debates. And I think this is very important. I think people are not aware of this. I took part in a meeting of the joint meeting of the Moscow Academy of Sciences, the Free Economic Society, and MAF, which I've forgotten what it stands for, basically all the economists of Russia. And it was a very dramatic event. This was 2019, and they had a big screen where they asked questions and you had to vote. And one question was, do you think the current system should be replaced by planning? 38% voted yes. I also attended a long session organized by the Irkutsk Governorate, where they have a left-wing, governor, Levchenko, which you probably know of, and they had implemented a plan. And this is the Deripaska territory, right? He owns 150,000 houses. He floods places he doesn't like. He owns the aluminium plant. I mean, everything that a horrible oligarch can do. And Deripaska's press was daily pumping out stuff. What nonsense, return to Soviet planning, terrible thing that the left-wing government is doing. Okay, so this is a big debate in Russia now. Now, first point, I have some credentials. Whilst working for the mayor of London between 2000 and 2008, I was involved in the team that prepared the London plan. Secondly, as a software expert, I actually worked with Sony, who implemented the most planned centralized international system of production, the forerunner of just-in-time production known. And I implemented their communication system. So I was in at the ground floor of automation. So I have some credentials. It's very simple. All societies plan. Capitalism plans. The big monopolies, so Coca-Cola, I work for them too, Sony, they are the most planned, Toyota, they're the most planned organizations you should imagine, right? All cities have plans, every single city in the world. The only time there was no plan was under Thatcher, who dissolved the planning system of London. And we spent 4 years putting back together the damage that she had done, the levels of poverty, of misery, of disgusting waste that resulted from not having a plan. We had to fight back against that. So there's no question that planning is better than neoliberalism. But the question is one of democracy. Who controls the plan? That's the democratic question, in my opinion. And I think this is so central because let's take one of the things we achieved, and I'll finish on this. We fought for 15 years. It's just opening now. A single fast rail line, not having across London. Somebody's got their microphone on. A single cross-rail link. This was of vital social importance because people were priced out of London by the Big Bang. So you could not be a porter or a cafeteria worker or a cleaner. You could not live affordably. So the purpose of having this big railway line was so that key workers could actually afford to live outside the city, inside the city. Housing prices had gone crazy and travel in. So it was a social, not just a technical initiative. Now, it's just opened now, and I'm very pleased. Let me ask a single question. This is a planning decision. This is a planning decision. There were lots of local input, people who said, we want a station in Gravesend, or we don't want a station in Gravesend. The city lobbied me, and they said, we should have no branch line to Docklands because Docklands is the enemy of the city. But the decision on whether to have a railway line is a central decision. There is no alternative to that. And either the capitalists take that decision or the workers take that decision. Therefore, the issue is, how do you control the planning mechanism? And one more thing, society has moved on. The reason for bureaucracy is precisely that humans are in charge of these decisions. When we implemented the congestion charge in London, it wasn't possible for, in Eastern Europe, I remember motorcycling through Eastern Europe under pre-socialist conditions, and there was a policeman at every city boundary, and he had the right to point a radar gun at you and fine you on the spot. And so he was given bureaucratic petty power because he was a human in charge of deciding. The congestion charge that a machine will decide. And I think this is wonderful because all you have to do is control the algorithm of that machine. And that algorithm is subject to public control. It should be anyway. You should know what the rules are. And what you do is you have the right to decide what the rules are. This was not available when only humans. I mean, it should have been available. There should have been control over the rules. But once the machinery changes the whole debate. So I would just urge that you look at the planning debate in Russia as it is today. You don't impose on the discussions of today conditions that have vanished into history. We should analyze them, but not suppose we now face the same decisions. And the question of democracy and planning, to me, and which class controls are completely intertwined. So I do urge you to take the Russian planning debate of today into the conference that you are organizing.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are going to move beyond time, but anybody would like to comment or react to Alan's comment? Because then we have two more hands. One is of Brian, and then Radhika would like to say something. Who would like to react to Alan?
I do nothing
Tomasz.
but planning
Only
in
one
Boulder,
sentence.
Colorado.
Yeah.
And so I totally agree with Alan. However, I wanted to bring up one technical point of the transcript. Can someone correct it? Like at one point here, it said, dolphins are the enemy of the city. It's because it's a mistranscript, and people that are trying to follow this with accents can't. It's a matter of technical fixing.
So if I can answer the technical question, we can't really do that. It's generally, So I'm afraid it's just the machine transcription that you will get. We don't have anyone to correct the machine transcription. Sorry about that.
Okay.
However, if people would like to volunteer to help via the volunteer contact form on the International Manifesto site, then we can overcome it.
Yeah, okay.
And here, sorry, so Attila, since this has already come up, I'm just going to interrupt you very briefly. So I just wanted to say, Attila is going to say something about ESMELET, and I will just say very briefly that the International Manifesto Group, the website is here. I've just shared it in the chat. Please consider reading the manifesto. Please consider signing the manifesto. Please consider donating to us, and please consider volunteering to participate in our work. Thank you very much.
Okay, then I'm supposed to say something about ESMELET. So ESMELET is the only Marxist critical journal in Hungary, one of the oldest ones in Eastern Europe, actually, because it was already, in the beginning, it was established in 1956, right? And it was just basically resumed in 1989. And this is following the legacy of critical thought of Mészáros, Lukács, and various ways of workers manage socialism. And this perspective, Tomasz is the person who is representing ESMELET since 1989. And I was just happy to join it. And of course, most importantly, what is the role of SMILAT is to provide really good critical discussions to the topics we are talking about, right? So actually, that is the point what we have been trying to make all the time, right? Thomas, would you like to add something to this? No?
I wanted only one sentence to Alan and to Karen.
Okay. And then we have to give back the floor to Brian as well. Yes. Okay, go ahead, Thomas. Yes.
The question is, what kind of state we want? You see, common state or bureaucratic state? That state which was in the Soviet Union at the end when the state power elite destroyed the Soviet Union and the socialist experiment or state socialist experiment. This is the bureaucratic state. We cannot do the same. You see, this is very important. A new kind of development, common state, nothing else, you see. This is the unification of the anti-capitalist left, the key term, key category. Without that, we cannot make unification. We have to find these key terms. And today I think that, for example, Raquel or Rasko represent very következetesen, very
consequent,
consistently the common state as in mixed economy, of course, will be in other type of state also. But Lukács said this is a methodological overwhelming moment. Which element in the development defines the phenomenon? Yeah. My English is very bad, but I think that you can follow me. The overwhelming moment, this is the common state, you see, in this development. Without that, we cannot go on.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
That's all from the SVLET. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's very important. Thank you very much. Brian, the very last moment.
Okay, I think it's a very good point to finish off on. Look, for over a century, all the left groups have confused planning with a social fund. It's the social fund where you have committees and interest groups arguing, discussing all the compromises that go into the social fund. So there will be those people arguing for the maximum amount of money to be spent on saving the planet. There will be those arguing for the maximum amount of money to be used to raise all workers to the highest skill at the earliest opportunity. There will be those groups arguing for making this very uneven world economy as even as possible. Those are the groups. It does not apply to planning. Planning, nothing can stand between the individual's choice of what they want to consume. Can you imagine today if workers went into a mall and at the front of the mall was a committee which was going to tell them what they could and couldn't spend their money on, or their workers' vouchers, their labor vouchers on that particular day? It's insulting. It's exactly what happened in the Soviet Union, where planning was patronizing and alienating. And I'll say it again, read the critique of the Gotha program with fresh eyes. It was a polemical document, not a pedagogic document, but contained in there is so much more than people realize, particularly on the distinction between the social fund and planning. And I hope that within 5 years, we won't have all the nonsense spoken about committees deciding on how workers are going to spend their labor vouchers. So thank you very much for an interesting discussion. And Alan, I've read your document. All power to the algorithms. Yes, there's a lot of interest in there. But remember, fundamentally, all the planning bodies will do will be collating the decisions made by workers on how they want to spend their labor vouchers.
Okay. Now with this, I have to say thank you. And I think we have to thank all the speakers who have been doing an excellent job. So thanks to Esther, to Rasko, zillion thanks to Raquel and to Tomasz as well. Also, thanks for hosting this debate. And I think that the implications of this debate are really far-reaching in many respects, and we should continue. And let me just say that SMELA, together with the other co-partners, it's going to make this new conference on mixed economy, which is actually something we are talking about all the time. And then non-capitalist mixed economies, don't be mistaken, because some people start thinking about Swedish model and then we just basically give up. So the key point is about non-capitalist mixed economies, how they operate, what was the historical experience and how to in the future. And please come to us, to SMELAT as well, in case you would like to publish good critical articles, which we try to do it in beautiful Hungarian, but also sometimes in English as well. So with this, once again, thank you very much. Big clap to everybody. Thank you very much for the commentators as well, and for the lively debate and the honesty of this debate, which was so good to listen to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.